She didn't listen to me.
What did you say?
She didn't listen. No, I told her how to do it. That will be up to her to say. But I told her how to do it. She wanted to go a different route.
I know she's looking forward to setting out to him how this Brexit plan will work, what the detail is, and how that will enable us to engage in a very positive way with the US.
Anti-Trump protesters are already gathering in central London for a day of marches. There were loud cheers as the Trump baby blimp was raised earlier.
Here at Chequers, Theresa May is facing a crunch news conference with the American president after his criticism of her Brexit. Will she go toe-to-toe with the Donald, or will it be softly?
More to come later from Norman. The other headlines this hour. The British divers who were part of the rescue mission in Thailand arrived back in the UK. One of the divers insists he's not a hero. At least 200 people in Japan are reported to have been killed in the worst flooding to affect the country in nearly 40 years.
I'm Anita McVeigh, live at Westminster today, the heart of British democracy, on the second day of the US President Donald Trump's visit to the United Kingdom. Just over my shoulder, peeking above the treetops, is the Trump baby balloon, the Trump baby blimp, which has become an image, a very striking image of the protests that await the president today. He won't be close to any of those protests, of course, the locations where he will be today, well away from them, but nonetheless, thousands of people, it's thought maybe as many as 100,000 people, will take to the streets here in London and in other parts of the UK to give voice to their objections to his visit here. Myriad groups, lots of different groups coming together in a coalition of protest. Meanwhile, President Trump will be getting on with his engagements today, including, in a short while, a meeting at the UK Prime Minister Theresa May's country residence, Chequers, and to be a fly on the wall during the conversation they'll be having after those comments by President Trump in a newspaper interview where he poured cold water on the idea of a post-Brexit US-UK trade deal because of Theresa May's Brexit plans, because of the nature of those plans. Also commenting on the fact that he thought Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary who resigned earlier this week, would make a good Prime Minister, and saying yesterday, of course, just to remind you, that he thought the sort of Brexit that the UK was talking about was not what people had voted for. So undoubtedly an eventful day ahead. It will be fascinating to hear what the two leaders say in their news conference at Chequers later. So let's take stock of events so far with this report from John Donnison.
Theresa May might have been hoping the special relationship would provide some solidarity and support at a difficult time. But in a remarkable interview, President Trump said he'd told the Prime Minister on Brexit she'd got it wrong.
I would have done it much differently. I actually told Theresa May how to do it, but she didn't agree with it. She didn't listen to me. She didn't listen. No, I told her how to do it. That will be up to her to say. But I told her how to do it. She wanted to go a different route.
Not exactly hand in hand. The President said the Prime Minister's vision of a Brexit deal would kill any possible trade agreement with the United States.
Well, if they do a deal like that, it will most likely, because we'll be dealing with the European Union instead of dealing with the UK. So it will probably kill the deal with, if they do that, their trade deal with the US will probably not be made.
Absent from the pomp and ceremony at Blenheim Palace, the former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson, a thorn in the side of Theresa May, who the President would like to see make a return.
Let me tell you, he's a very talented guy. I was very saddened to see that he was leaving government Well, I'm not pitting one against the other. I'm just saying I think he'd be a great prime minister.
Hardly music to the ears of the actual Prime Minister. And while there were warm words for the former Mayor of London, not so much for the current one, Sadiq Khan.
You have a mayor who's done a terrible job in London. He's done a terrible job. I think he's done a very bad job on terrorism. I think he's done a bad job on crime, if you look. And you take a look at your hospital in London, you know what I'm talking about.
It was Sadiq Khan who signed off on the Trump baby blimp that protesters will float over London today.
What do we want? Trump out! When do we want him? Now!
The demonstrations against his visit have made him feel unwelcome, the president said. These people don't like anything Mr. Trump has to say. After his latest comments, Theresa May might share some of their pain. John Donnison, BBC News.
Well, that controversial interview from Donald Trump, which has attracted so much criticism, was given to the Sun newspaper's Tom Newton-Dunn. Let's hear what he has to say about the interview.
I think they're a bit fed up, a bit depressed by it all. I mean, obviously her political situation is incredibly vulnerable at the moment, very, very brittle, and it's probably the last thing she needed. But that said, though, it's going to be very fascinating how this plays out today, because it may work for her. If you like Donald Trump and you're a big fan of the US, then you want a trade deal with the US, and if you're a pretty hardcore Brexiteer, then you will be very concerned by what he says, and you will be ever angrier with Theresa May by what people say is a soft Brexit sellout. However, if you don't think Donald Trump is up to much good, then it is quite possible this could help Theresa May. Nobody likes to see a US president tell a British Prime Minister what to do, and this is, without a shadow of doubt, a US president telling the British Prime Minister not to do. So it's entirely possible it will also engender a bit of sympathy for her amongst her backbenches, which is not huge at the moment, and they may rally behind her.
Well, today's meeting between the UK Prime Minister Theresa May and the US President Donald Trump at Theresa May's country residence Chequers is due to start shortly. Let's cross to our assistant political editor, Norman Smith, who's at Chequers. Norman, well, gosh, one wonders what Theresa May is going to say to Donald Trump following that interview he gave to the Sun newspaper, and one wonders what they're going to say in the news conference that's expected to take place afterwards.
Anita, we're facing a fascinating piece of political theatre, no doubt about it, when we get to that news conference. Donald Trump arrived a short time ago in the sort of lovely Buckinghamshire countryside, miles away from the protests in London. Fleet of huge helicopters bringing in Donald Trump's entourage for what will first be private talks. And you just wonder, after last night when T. May came out thinking, well, everything's gone pretty well, it all seemed to be quite cheery, and she made that speech setting out the sort of transatlantic ties, long-standing historical relationships, citing Winston Churchill, then to pick up the Sun newspaper and read what Donald Trump has said about her approach to Brexit, in effect, that she's got it all wrong, that she's mishandling the negotiations, should be much tougher with Brussels, she's not going to deliver the sort of Brexit that people really voted for, and crucially, so crucially, saying, look, you're not going to get a trade deal with us if you go ahead with this sort of white paper you outlined yesterday. And as if all that wasn't enough, he then goes out of his way again to very publicly endorse Boris Johnson, Theresa May's arch rival, saying, you know what, he'd make quite a good prime minister. It's hard to think of anything more likely to have Downing Street just tearing out their hair, wondering what on earth do we do? Now, in private, there may be some frank talking, but in public, I would be very surprised if Theresa May sought to front up to Donald Trump, because it's really not in her political makeup. She finds these news conferences quite awkward and difficult anyway, and the idea that she would be willing to take on a bruiser like Donald Trump, who just loves the sort of fisticuffs of verbal combat in the sort of spotlight, high risk, dangerous, she just gets eaten alive. More likely, it'll be a much more muted, gentle rebuff in public, restating her convictions that this is a practical Brexit. And that was the message we heard This morning from the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, when, of course, he was asked about the comments by Donald Trump, putting a much more emollient spin on it. Let's have a listen to Philip Hammond.
The Prime Minister has a working meeting scheduled with the President later today. I know she's looking forward to setting out to him how this Brexit plan will work, what the detail is, and how that will enable us to engage in a very positive way with the US in the future. And I'm sure that as a result of that discussion, we will have a way forward both with the United States and with our partners in the European Union.
So you're suggesting at the moment that the President doesn't quite understand what the deal is that's on the table?
Well, the President hasn't yet had a chance, I think, to discuss with the Prime Minister the white paper, which was, after all, only published yesterday. And I know she's looking forward to the opportunity to discuss with the President how we can take forward the big opportunities for increasing trade and investment between the UK and the US that she mentioned last night during the dinner at Blenheim. And I saw that the President was nodding furiously as she was speaking last night. And I'm sure there'll be a very positive discussion between them today.
Now, of course, this isn't just about Brexit, it's also really about Mrs May's leadership, because the President's comments, I think many people would say, show an element of almost disregard, almost